Kristin Uiterwyk. I'm the director of the Urban Harbors Institute. We work a lot on the Cape, so it's really nice to be here talking to you folks about this. In terms of the agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit more. We heard a lot about retreat, relocation, reconfiguration at the earlier presentation, and so we're going to just build on that a little bit, dive into it in a little greater detail, and spend some time talking about how you frame it and how the words that you use really matter. And then we're going to ask you all to participate in an activity so that you can sort of dabble in what retreat planning looks like, think about some of the hard questions, and hopefully figure out how you want to engage in this topic moving forward. I do want to say, for that interactive piece, you're going to want at least one other person at your table, so if there aren't at least two of you there, please find another table to join. Emma and I are talking to you today as part of a larger project that's funded by the State Office of Coastal Zone Management. We have a number of partners. They're on the bottom of the screen here. And what we're really trying to do is demystify coastal relocation. 10 years ago, I never would have thought that this topic would be on an agenda like this. And so it's really great that people are comfortable talking about it now. We've developed a peer learning network so that, and we used to call it the Coastal Retreat support group, but now it's the peer learning network where we talk about questions that people are having, challenges people are having. We bring in experts to learn. So the last slide, there's a QR code. If you find this interesting, you want to be part of the network, we welcome anyone. There's also a great resource. We had a grad student put together everything he could find about managed retreat. So journal articles, newspaper articles, examples from other communities, talking points from other communities. And so there's a great, if you go to the Nature Conservancy's website, there's a great link to that hub. And then we've been doing a lot of conversations, especially our partners with Carrie Hewlett Consulting and Crew, talking to communities. What is it? So UHI a number of years ago talked to municipalities, figured out what their challenges and opportunities were. Now Crew and Carrie are out there talking to residents, business owners. What are they thinking about in terms of retreat? And so at the end of June, there'll be a report on what they've all learned to hopefully help guide you all as you talk to communities. This is just the beginning. We're hoping to elevate this work and take it to the next level, providing technical assistance to communities. So we'll see where that goes. So before we really get into this, I'm just going to show all the bullets so nobody has to guess what they want to vote on. Just like it's helpful for Emma and I to know who we're talking to as we're having these conversations. So can you raise your hands if you're sort of just learning about managed retreat? A couple of people. Let me say there's no right or wrong answer. We just want to know who we're talking to. All right. Can you raise your hand if you're sort of thinking about it and talking to people about it and starting to have conversations? Okay. What about people who are actively working on planning for a project? Okay. And what about people who are already working on a specific site to relocate? Okay, I see, just so you all see that, there's like 2 or 3 hands up for that last one. This is a really challenging subject that Emma and I will share a little bit more about, but it seems like most of you are in that just starting to think about, just starting to learn about, so that's really helpful to know. With that, I'm gonna pass it over to Emma, who's gonna take you through the next set of slides.
Hi, everyone. So I'm gonna go through a bunch of slides that tell you things you already know. We're going to talk about, how many of you have experienced coastal flooding at some point or know somebody who has? None of you? What? How many of you have experienced coastal flooding of some sort in your life? Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I expect. We are going to move into talking about how we talk about this. So what I want you to focus on over the next minute or two when I'm explaining this topic is not, oh yes, Emma is telling me something that I already know, using pictures of places that I know better than she does. I want you to think about it from the perspective of, how am I framing things? How am I talking about this? Because we've already been talking about it all day. This is not news to you that the water is coming for us. And so I also, before I dive into kind of looking at how are we talking about coastal flooding and our options, I also want to just do my standard plug for My Coast. All the pictures of flooding that you will see in these slides come from My Coast. How many of you have heard of My Coast? How many of you have submitted something to My Coast? Okay, very few of you have submitted. My Coast helps the state and other partners understand what flooding looks like on the ground, and it's incredibly powerful. So use My Coast, and if you haven't, it's full of good pictures, probably from your community. So we know that coastal flooding is something that is happening across Massachusetts. It's happening on sunny days. It's happening after storms and during storms. It's causing damage and disruption and just like annoyances. It's causing severe erosion. And as we just asked, if I was in a public setting right now, this is where I would ask that question about how many of you have experienced it. But starting by showing this is real, it's happening now, helps people connect to it in real life. And then you get to go to these super fun maps that show the places that in 2030 will only see flooding in, oh wait, I can do this. That will only see flooding, oh, you can't see my mouse, oh well. That will only see flooding in a really severe storm. So if you look at these Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model images, the reds, the oranges, the yellows in that upper image are places that only have a 0.1 or 0.2 or 0.3% chance of being flooded every year. Those are the places that in a true emergency, in a massive storm, you'd get flooding. The waterier colors, those blues and purples, that's where the water really wants to be. That's where you might see annual flooding. That's where you might just see regular high tide sunny day flooding. And so if you look, there are many places on this map that right now only see flooding in really extreme events. But by 2070, we'll see regular flooding at least annually. And this isn't restricted to any one part of the coast. This is really happening up and down the Massachusetts coast, and of course, doesn't stop at the Massachusetts border. It's happening up and down coasts all over the world. And since colonization, we've basically had a status quo for dealing with flooding. We start by saying, water, you go over there, we're gonna go over here, we're gonna build some really big thing, and everybody's gonna work out great. And that works out really well, right? Always, there's never any problems with that? Not so much, right? We completely destroy our coastal ecosystems. We disconnect ourselves from the coast. We make flooding and erosion worse. We have to constantly maintain these crumbling concrete structures. But this is how we've been doing it, right? We've been saying nature goes over here, people goes over here. We can totally fight the ocean. That's never gonna end badly for us. Then, when it starts to be clear that the ocean is winning, then we start saying, okay, fine, I'll accommodate the water. Maybe we'll elevate homes, we'll expand culverts, we'll plan our daily travel around the roads that we know, flood at high tide. And when that really doesn't work, when we've been flooded out so many times that we just can't deal with it anymore, or we can't afford to deal with it anymore, then we say, okay, fine, the ocean wins. We're gonna step back. It's a big question mark, and it really varies on town how much avoiding putting human infrastructure in floodplains in the first place happens. There's places that do a really good job of this, and all over the country, we are still building in floodplains all the time. So that's a big question mark. But this is our status quo. The status quo for a long time has been fight the water until we can't fight anymore. Now, a few years ago, some of my colleagues at the Nature Conservancy proposed a better way, which was the flood adaptation hierarchy, which recognizes that the best outcomes are when we make space for water, when we recognize that fighting water is a losing battle over time, right? We're going to constantly we will constantly be fighting this battle, and with accelerating climate change, we will be fighting it more and more severely, more and more frequently. But by working with water, by saying we aren't separate from water, we can live alongside water. We can protect our natural buffers, basically don't put ourselves where the water wants to be all the time. We can eliminate risk by stepping back from where the water wants to be. And then we can move into passive risk reduction strategies like elevating and culvert expansion, active risk reduction, things like building like temporary barriers or avoiding places that are flooded. And only then do we get into things that really harden our shorelines. The reality is we need all of this. The reality is that this is really a toolbox, and different tools have different purposes. And so as we're thinking about what are all the tools we can do, what are all of the different things that we heard about this morning, what are all of the different ways that we can really think about how do we live with water for the next several generations in a changing coast? Because the only thing that can't be in this toolbox is doing nothing. Because our status quo isn't working. What we've been doing for the last several hundred years of fighting water is just not going to work. And so we need all of these tools, but the tool that we really haven't gotten good at yet, because it requires really changing our mindsets and our approaches to dealing with this problem, is this idea about removing structures, returning to nature, and getting out of the way of water. And so that is what we're here to talk about today. And I'm going to turn it over to Kristin to get a little bit deeper into what that means.
Okay, I'm going to get my glasses because I'm old. All right, so is this on? Can you guys hear me? Did this magically go off? Can you hear me now?
You guys hear me okay? Yeah, we can. I'm also just louder than Kristin is.
I'll get the AV guy, but you could.
That's all right. I feel like we're at karaoke.
Ooh, that is way better.
Awesome. So thanks, Emma, for that great background. Part of this, too, is that a lot of you guys already know a lot of what we're going to talk about. Emma and I have spent a lot of time talking to people about how you talk about it, so hopefully some of the words we use, some of the slides we use can be helpful to you. If you want to steal any slides, just email us. I think they're all public resource at this point. So what is moving out of the floodplain? Well, as the words say up here, it's eliminating flood risk by helping people, homes, and infrastructure move out of areas that are going to flood. We should make it clear that we're not just talking about flooding areas. Erosion is also a main driver of relocation and retreat, and so we'll just keep that in mind as we talk about it. In addition, the term managed retreat is like the most imperfect term ever. Nobody wants to be managed. Retreat sounds like giving up. It is, however, the term that most people use these days, so we're going to stick with it for this presentation. But as you're talking to your own communities, your own stakeholders, your own partners, think about the terms that are best to use for them. Is it reconfiguration? Is it community-driven coastal relocation? Is it proactive relocation? There's a million ways to talk about this. Is it just getting out of the harm's way? Common sense? Like, figure out the terms that work best for your context and go with those. But we're going to use managed retreat. What does it look like? Well, a lot of people have heard of voluntary buyouts. Who knows about the state's voluntary buyout pilot program? Is that on folks' radar? So just so you all know, for those who don't, the state has actually started looking into this. They are underway with a study on how to develop a voluntary buyout and elevation program for the state. So if you're interested in that, MEMA is the entity that's coordinating that. Feel free to look on their website and find the information there or contact us. We have stuff about that. Relocation and retreat is also about moving structures. That could be within the same parcel. That could be to another parcel. You've all seen pictures, dramatic pictures of lighthouses moving back from eroding bluffs. That's what we're talking about with moving structures. In the session next door, they're talking about things like policy and regulatory tools to keep flooding from buildings from happening in the floodplain, and how do you manage repeated loss. There's a lot of great regulatory and zoning tools to help with this process. And then what I think Emma and I get most excited about when we talk about this topic is the potential to protect the natural systems and restore things after the retreat has happened. And that's where you guys will dabble in a minute. Just as a building on what Emma said, retreat is one tool in the toolbox, and as you heard from the panel, these things take a really long time. So sometimes you might not be in a situation where you can consider proactive retreat right away, right? Like the house is falling in the water, the road is falling in the water, you have to deal with it right now. That's not super ideal. Maybe you can sandbag for a little while because that takes less time, even though it does take time, takes less time than thinking about something like voluntary buyout. So this slide is simply to show that there are different tools in the toolbox that take different amount of time, and how long they stay in effect also is time dependent. All right, so what is managed retreat and why is it so hard? We did a study a couple years ago, and just talking to people, what we're finding, which will not be of any surprise to you guys, is that it's politically charged, right? Very few elected officials want to be like, hey, guess what? You're moving, right? Like you're never going to do that. It's expensive. It's hard to fund, especially given our current political climate. It's painful and it's emotionally charged. When you're talking about moving somebody's beach or their home or their boat ramp, like they've got memories around these places, especially when you're talking about homes. Memories, financial investments, this is part of maybe what they hope to pass down to their children. This is where they hung out with grandma and grandpa, right? Like these are special places and nobody really wants to leave them. There's also a high potential for inequity. I don't think that this will come as a surprise to you all, but the past decisions that got us to where we are have not been made very equitably, right? And so if we don't take a moment to think about what happens when people have to move, then there's an opportunity to just, when it has to happen rapidly, inequities will be continued. And then, as I think it was Josh put it, this is a lot of different skill sets have to come together to successfully make retreat happen. It's municipal finance, it's law, it's public engagement, right? You have to have a lot of expertise, and there's no unicorn person who can do this. It really requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnership building. But on the flip side, I'm just going to put all these up. I'm very impatient. Emma made the slideshow. She doesn't know that about me yet. But what is managed retreat? Well, for some places it's necessary. And that might be hard for people to hear, but there are places where the only long-term alternative will be to move. And what we've learned in talking to all these people and finding what resonates with people is thinking about this as an opportunity. So you'll see the next three have the word opportunity. It's an opportunity to prevent losses, right? So people are sick of losing their homes. Communities are sick of rebuilding the same roads. People are tired of talking about what are we going to do, right? So it's an opportunity to prevent those losses. It's an opportunity to reimagine our coasts. So when you retreat, what happens with that land? When you retreat, how do those community conversations change the way that we engage with each other and the way that we engage with the environment and the way that we engage with the place that we are? And then it's an opportunity for restoration. So again, how do you think about retreat as a way to improve the natural environment, repair relationships between people and people in the land? Why didn't that advance? There we go. So this slide comes from our colleague, Carrie Hewlett, who, again, recognizing that sometimes retreat is inevitable, the question is really not if we retreat, it's whether we do it managed or unmanaged. So unmanaged, you can see, reinforces the status quo that Emma was talking about. You can lose community character as people have to leave. Houses lie abandoned. I will inherit a mowed lot in New Orleans that is tied up in a custody problem because they didn't retreat before Katrina. It exacerbates inequity. There's huge losses for individuals and the community. You think about like the property taxes that go with a house that's just a blight on a coastal area that then has to be demolished. And it's responsive. You miss opportunities to do this right. If, however, you do managed retreat, you think about this proactively, which, as we heard today, there are places that might not need to retreat for 100 years. The time to start those conversations is now, right? It's not when that retreat project is going to be 10 years out, right? You need to start planting this seed now so that you can talk about how do you share the risk, right? How do you manage the risk? It doesn't need to fall on one homeowner to move their home. How do you manage retreat in the context of a larger vision, right? So rather than doing these little patchwork removals, can you focus on some sort of managed retreat that happens that leads to, a nice new natural place for people to visit until it erodes or whatever? It's action, it's not reaction, it's planning when you're calm. You can all think of times where you've had to make a decision and you've panicked. If you have the luxury to go back and think about what would I have done if I wasn't in that state of anxiety, you might have come up with a different answer, right? So taking the time to do it now while it's still something that's sort of further removed. And you can minimize losses. Emma's writing me a note. Oh, 20 minutes, thanks. So if we get this right, this is what it means. Proactively planning, you get safer, connected, resilient coastlines. You connect people to waters. You can protect and restore natural places, which, based on what we heard yesterday, all the work to reestablish salt marshes and do the eelgrass plantings, it seems like that's something that this community is interested in. And again, you meet community goals. So sorry, Emma, I went a little long.
No, it's fine. I don't know why that last picture was upside down, but oh well. But the bottom line is we can't solve this problem unless we talk about it. Remember when talking about climate change was like the thing nobody wanted to do? We were even worse at dealing with climate change when we couldn't talk about it. Because if you don't talk about it, it's just this big, scary thing that you're intentionally not looking at. My Slidos aren't working, and I don't know why. So I just want you guys to take a minute or two, just quietly, to think about the feelings and reactions, either that you know or that you expect this is going to bring up for your communities. Just take a minute to think about it, or like 30 seconds. It is very hard for me to sit here quietly and watch you all think. While you're thinking, does anybody want to just shout out one of the things that you're thinking about? Where do I go? Incredulity. Anxiety. Unfairness. Grief is, yes. Resistance. Anger. So there's a lot of heavy emotions that makes it justifiably really hard to talk about. So we can't solve the problem unless we talk about it, but we also need to talk about it carefully and inclusively and just compassionately. We need to talk about it in a way that is reciprocal. And so we've talked about that the term managed retreat is challenging, but there kind of isn't a better term. And one of the reasons that there isn't a better term is because it's a really hard situation. I made a joke that was not a great joke, but it kind of helps get to the point of it. If I know that I need major surgery that will result in my leg not working anymore, but I will be able to stay alive. Say I'm gonna get my leg amputated. It's terrible, right? If you call it strategic leg realignment, I'm not gonna like it better. I still might know that I need to do it and that it's going to save my life. And whatever you call it, it's not going to work, or it's not going to make me happy. If you come in and say, okay, this leg is coming off tomorrow, I'm not gonna be a big fan of that either. But if you come in and say, here's the problem, what are some solutions? What are the options we have? Let's talk it through. That's a fundamentally different thing. This is a weird analogy about cutting off my own leg, but it's not actually that far, right? If you think about our coastal communities, especially on the Cape, that's why people live here. Like, nobody's like, I want to live on the Cape because I hate the ocean. I want to be really, really far away from the Great Ponds. I hate traffic. People live here because it's part of culture to be near the water. I mean, it's foundational. And so to actually just kind of skip ahead so we can get to our activity, my kind of top tips, there's no one word. I would love to be, actually Leah reached out recently and was like, where are we at with the words? Where is Leah? Oh, I just saw her. There's no good word. We had a whole email thread about how there's no good word. But it's about the conversations around the word. It's about how we're contextualizing the word. So it's about thinking about having conversations, not just like, hello, I'm going to talk at you about this solution. It's how do we make sure that we are having interactive conversations? So this is actually a picture from one of our community events up in Salem. I took terrible pictures in Barnstable a couple weeks ago, so none of those are in here. But really, it's about making space for multiple directional flows of information. Because that's how you earn trust, right? That's how you become just not just a person standing on a stage with a microphone, but somebody who is actually embedded into the community, thinking about who your messengers are, what the context of what else is happening in the community. When we ask people why they come to our events, we hear about everything from culverts to historical preservation to neighborhood gentrification. We hear about everything. And so when we build from those lived community experiences, we can work towards shared values. Those shared values of what do we care about? How do we build something together that makes sense for us? And that has to come with recognizing, like, hey, has your community, have you and your community been kicked off of lands before? This is gonna be real complicated. We know this is really complicated. Are you really afraid of what's going to happen to you financially if you have to move? Absolutely, you should be. We need to recognize that. Who in the room has power and who feels powerless? We have to acknowledge that and build spaces where we can really build the future together. And so building the future together is the part that I find most inspiring, because when you think about that grief, it's real. I feel climate grief all the time. And I'm sure many of you do as well. But one of the ways through that I have found most powerful is the ability to say, what if we could shape the future together? So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to hand it back to Kristin.
Thanks. Thanks. Why is it that every time you hand me the mic, it goes? Is this on?
Is this
on?
Is this on? Is this? No. No. Oh.
You can now. Okay. All right. Magic. Thank you. All right. You all have a piece of paper. We are going to shorten this activity a little bit because we only have 20 minutes left. But here is a hypothetical. It's not Massachusetts, so nobody try and guess where it is. In this red box is a group of homes, and the people have all decided that they're done being impacted by storms. They're ready to move, and they know that this barrier beach that they're on is likely going to be underwater twice daily at high tide by the end of the century, by 2100. So, through a community process, they've established a committee. Congratulations, you're on it. And your job is to think about what's going to happen to this land once the houses come down, right? So sometimes we do this and we invite people to put on hats like, you're a land developer, you're a neighbor, you're a municipal employee, you're part of the Department of Public Works. If you want to put on a hat because that is more fun for you, we invite you to. The piece of paper that you have has spaces for you to come up with 3 different strategies. Given the amount of time we have, why don't you just focus on one? And what we want you to think about is, for your strategy, every time you make a decision, there's winners and there's losers, right? Whether it's the people that are winning or some people are winning, some people are losing, the environment is winning, the environment's losing. Who are the winners and the losers? What are the benefits and the drawbacks? Another important question is, what information would you need to be able to make this decision about implementing this strategy? The information is both quantitative, like beach erosion rates, sea level rise, but also qualitative, right? Engage the community. Who do you need to talk to about this? And this is my favorite question, how would your thinking about the strategy that you came up with change if you were thinking about it as a 10-year strategy, a 50-year strategy, or a strategy that's supposed to last out until 100 years? Although I guess this floods at 2100, so maybe like around 2100. So think about the short, medium, and long-term impacts of the strategy. We're going to give you 4 minutes to think by yourself. Please write down your answers. Emma and I, if you're all right with it, are going to take those and just look at them because it's helpful to see. 8 minutes. All right, so 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes to do this.
We said we needed to know that. Yeah.
I just think we need to know the cost of various options and do longer range planning. So we're doing a cost benefit analysis, and maybe investing in a short-term option is not really feasible financially. Maybe it's better to jump to the mid or longer term option. And then the other point is, if we don't have a longer range view, then how do we know how to get there?
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to share? I mean, I'm going to go to Sarah because she was sharing something fun. And I told her I was going to make her share it with y'all.
All right. Is it there? Okay, good. So I think that every house that's close to the coast in that picture should eventually be phased out, not just in the red box, because it's kind of unfair to be on the adjacent parcel to the red box. Or it's unfair to be on the inside, actually. So it would be a phased plan of communication as well as action over the longest time frame. So, you know, you have adults that are living in the houses now who their children and grandchildren know that at a particular time in the future that their house would have to go away. And to fund it, you could establish a bond that they paid into over the long term, and maybe also an emergency fund in case there was storm damage. You'd need to know, obviously, the storm frequency, the flooding depths in different parts of that area, wind directions, and all the things that would influence the likelihood of those houses being destroyed before the clock runs out on them.
Anybody else?
Anyone on this side? Oh.
I had kind of a creative idea to build a climate change museum there that's meant to show its degradation and how it's sinking as sea level rises over time, with some sort of indicator of like, this is as high as the flood got last year and this year, and somehow the structure is built to indicate that, whether it's paint color or something like that, so that it's a form of community outreach and people could go and kind of see that this is what could happen. I do think the drawbacks is that you're building money for a structure that's kind of meant to fall apart for educational purposes. And also, I don't know if it would be out of touch in the sense that people who are living adjacent to this patch, I don't know if they would be open to that, if it may come across as condescending in a way of like, this building was built as a museum, but that's your actual home right next to it. So I don't know, just an idea.
One of the things I love about that is we were talking about interdisciplinarity before. We have to bring in art. We have to bring in memorial. These are all hard words to say. And so the idea of how do we memorialize and learn from and leave something here for future generations to learn from. I love that.
Okay. Hi. Yeah. You know, I have down, first of all, do nothing, you know, and then the other end is used for some sort of municipal use. But the issue is that even if somebody's house falls in the water, they still own the property, you know, so the town has to control the property in order to do anything with it. And also, I know from experience that if the town or the county replenishes the sand on the beach, the property owner is supposedly give people strolling rights to go past the property. And, you know, I live in a coastal community, and what people do on the beach is they walk on the beach, you know. So you want to have public access to the beach regardless of whether you put anything there or not, you know. And that takes a negotiation with the landowner. Believe it or not, some people believe that someday the property may accrete and they can rebuild is unrealistic. So basically, first of all, the town controls the property, then you decide to open it up for recreation, strolling, and then you have to decide whether you have public access to the property or whether it's isolated in a residential area. So those are the issues you have to face. But I mean, do nothing but allow the public to use it however they want. You know, is my.
Yeah, and that's a definitely uniquely Massachusetts privatized shoreline access challenge. That's really part of what we have to untangle and think about.
Yeah. So I think
So-
we're almost at time, right?
Yeah, I think we're really close to it. We have a few minutes left for questions.
Just before we move to
yeah.
questions, just to wrap up that activity, we like to do that activity for 3 reasons. First, as we were talking about, this is really an opportunity if you think about it, right? So you all just had the opportunity to think about what might happen with that land and get a sense for that. And it's a hard opportunity to think about, but it's nonetheless an opportunity. The second thing, which we didn't really talk about, but it came up a bunch, is some of these decisions really require data. So we heard about data on financial impact, cost-benefit analyses. We heard about data on how long until these properties are going to need to be relocated and what can we do beforehand. So some of that data is available now. Some of that data is going to take a really long time to gather. So if you're in a position where you're thinking about a property that's in need of retreat down the road, think about what data and what stakeholders you need to engage now so that that conversation happens smoothly. And then the third thing, which again, we didn't really talk about, but when we do this activity and we really lean into that time component of the decisions, we find that if you ask people to plan for the next 10 years, they're like, oh, let's put a playground, let's put a boat ramp, and we know that it's going to leave. When you talk about 100 years out, people start thinking about this is going to affect future generations. These are my grandkids. This is the environment. Like, whole mind shift changes is much more value-based decisions. So again, if you're going into communities and you have the luxury of time to start these conversations now, I think the product will be more beneficial to a larger number of people if you start seeding those conversations now. So with that, I think we're on to questions, right? Sorry, we have 5 minutes for questions.
Hi, hello.
Can I see the number on it? Number 9, microphone 9.
Testing. Karaoke. Sarah McCormick, Town of Plymouth. I'm with the Department of Energy and Environment. Earlier we spoke about catastrophic events and that being the really impetus for some of these actions. We've seen catastrophic events in other coastal communities across the country. I think of the homes in the Outer Banks quite literally falling into the ocean daily, or the homes in Malibu that were affected by wildfires, but you're still talking about a loss of coastal homes. Are you aware of conversations happening around rebuilding in those areas or other places around the country? What the appetite is for managed retreat in other locations, thinking, they are a catastrophic event or two ahead of us?
So I don't know of anything going on in the wildfire context. That's a really great question. We can look at Sandy as an example, right? So what happened with them? That was a catastrophic event. Some people chose to rebuild. Some people chose to leave. And I think that's why this is hard. There are plenty of places that for a very long time people have been leaving because they know it's the right thing to do, right? But whether or not that process has been documented in a way that can inform better decision making, that's sort of where we are now. We're learning from what's happening in other places. I'll refer you back to that database that I talked about at the very beginning. I know there are some examples in there of how it's been done elsewhere. That's a great question, though.
Are there states that have programs already in place to support retreating?
Why, yes, there are. So as the state of Massachusetts is looking to create their own buyout program, which we think would be the first proactively created. The rest were created reactively in response to storm events. The state's specifically looking towards New Jersey's blue acres. New York is blue buffers. They're still getting off the ground. But New Jersey's blue acres program, which has been happening for years, and they're actually primarily inland. It's a lot of inland and kind of riverine flooding. There's also Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, which is North Carolina, has a stormwater-based buyout program that's been really effective in establishing stormwater wetlands. And so there's a lot of different options. Again, if you join the Proactive Coastal Relocation Network or email one of us, sometimes Google has feelings about letting people into that group, you can email me. I'll get you in. We do have examples. Part of the database that Kristin keeps referring to is examples from other places. So Massachusetts wouldn't be the first. We can learn from others, but we're still early enough that we'd still be innovators, which we know we love to be. And then I think there's a question over here.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. My name's Rick Atherton. I live in Nantucket. And often we face this implication of a state law that requires a municipal community to provide access and utilities to homes in shoreline areas that are affected by sea level rise and erosion. Are there any efforts to get the state to bring those up to date? Otherwise, the property owners are able to hold the communities sort of hostage to continuing to support them with public money and protection. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. The state I'm just going to yell because I don't know what the problem is with Emma and I. I don't know of anything happening at the state level. However, there are municipalities who are thinking about, could there be triggers? Is there a way to set up, I don't know if it would be through zoning, maybe Leah can speak to this a little bit more based on what's going on in Nantucket, but are there triggers that would set an expectation for a person not to be able to rebuild or would have to leave? So like if you're in some distance of an eroding bluff, once that threshold is triggered, I'm sorry, your house is no longer safe to inhabit and you have to remove it, right? And so that would be something that a property owner would be aware of, ideally when they bought the property, assuming that the change happened before they were the homeowner. If they are the homeowner, then you got to figure out, is there a grandfather clause? What happens at the time maybe of property transfer? So there are people who are thinking about what are those predictable, or not predictable, but what are those triggers that could happen so that you no longer have the expectation to stay in that house because it's danger to you and hard for the community to keep up. So it was a good question. We're out of time. Thank you guys. Emma and I will be here.
Yes, please thank our speakers.